Now, this past week, something happened that was absolutely appalling. So appalling that I have to respond to it, because it is related to the topic of today. I don't think the people who perpetrated this act were aware that I would be talking about them. But you see, there is now, in a country with a large Muslim population, a major problem. The name of that country is Indonesia. Indonesia is a country of 120 million people, mainly built on islands off the coast of Southeast Asia. At one time, the islands belonged to the Portuguese, and then they were taken by the Dutch. And when I was young, they were called the Dutch East Indies. And they were not only the land of spice, they were also a land where large oil reserves were found. During World War II, they were occupied by the Japanese. And when the Japanese left, they left a national liberation movement that did not want the Dutch. And in time, in a few years, the Dutch were forced to leave. And a new country with the name, which had never been used before. Generally, the people were called Javanese. That is, the most important island was Java. But they invented this bureaucratic title, Indonesia. It does sound bureaucratic. They invented this bureaucratic title called Indonesia, and now that's the name of this collection of islands. There are about 120 million people in this place, and they are overwhelmingly Muslim. There are Christians and Hindus, large minorities, within the country, but it's overwhelmingly Muslim. What is interesting, since I have visited that place, including Bali, several times, what is interesting is that until very recently, the Muslims in Indonesia were moderates. That is, you did not see any women wearing veils. And in fact, most women didn't even wear head shawls. The people of Indonesia are of Malay culture, and Malay culture always treated its women with much more respect than Western Asian Semitic culture did. So it was a moderate Muslim country. The rulers, both Sukarno and Suharto, although they were dictators, were very much opposed to fanatic Islam. And in fact, if you went there, the country would be viewed as being dominated by secular forces. But over the last 10 to 15 years, things have changed. And there has now arrived in Indonesia a force in some way connected to the ideology of Al-Qaeda, which is Muslim fundamentalist. And already, in many parts of Indonesia, women are putting on the shawl, they're beginning to veil themselves, and now a powerful clergy is emerging, reinforced by Muslim fundamentalists in other countries, who are now preaching a vicious anti-Americanism, and who now denounce the culture of the West. Now, Indonesia depends economically on the West. It sells its oil to the West. And one of its major industries is tourism. There is an island which is the island of tourism. It's called Bali. Bali is different from the rest of Indonesia since the overwhelming majority of the people there are Hindu, meaning although they are Malay by race, they were influenced by Indian culture. And in fact, a large part of Indonesia before the Muslims came was under the influence of Hindu culture. So it's an island that is not Muslim, but it's also the primary tourist destination of people coming from Australia or from the West to Indonesia. They go to Bali, and the beaches are gorgeous, the hotels are even more gorgeous. It's absolutely wonderful. And young people love to vacation there. When it begins to get cold in Australia, hundreds and thousands of young Australians Beautiful young people, right, in their prime go off to Bali. And they're there for pleasure. Well, it happened. I mean, it was so horrible. Reading about it, seeing the photographs, whatever, there's no doubt about it. A group of Muslim fanatics, maybe allied to Al-Qaeda, planted a bomb between two clubs filled with hundreds of tourists, mainly Western tourists, and Australia, although it's in Southeast Asia, is what? Western. And they were dancing and they were singing, and quite frankly, they were innocent. And the next thing you know, boom! Almost 200 people were killed, and they were mainly young people. Many of them, dozens, if not hundreds, were burned, scarred, marked for the rest of their lives. It all happened in a flash. The people who left the bomb were very religious. Do you understand? And they believed that blowing up these people was an ethical and moral act commanded by their God. Boom! Am I talking about ethics and religion? All right. So, that is, we always grow up saying, oh, ethics and religion go together, and there are many people who say, well, I have to send my child to a religious institution, otherwise they will have no morality. But this act was committed in the name of religion, endorsed by religious leaders. The suspected organization has a man who was interviewed. His name is Bashir. He was interviewed, and the first thing out of his mouth was he hated America. The Americans are responsible, he said. In fact, the bomb was planted by Americans in order to embarrass Muslims. But then he no sooner finished that than he was into saying how Allah hates Americans and Jews, and it goes on and on and on and on. All in the name of religion. So what we have to look at today, because we are in a world of religious fundamentalism, okay? Not a trivial force. We know that after September the 11th. We're in a world where fundamentalist religion is very, very, very powerful. And one of the reasons why it grows is it presents itself to people as the defender of morality. Join us and we will preserve the historic and traditional morality of our culture. Oh, well. So the question is, do religion and morality go together as neatly and conveniently as the propaganda is presented? Or are we confronting a problem that we need to understand in a better way? We all know religious people who are very moral. And we all know religious institutions that do incredibly good ethical and moral work. But we also know about organizations that blow people up also in the name of religion. So now that means we have to look at what religion is. On previous occasions, I've talked about the nature of religion. Religion is built into the human condition. If there were not three things, there would be no religion. I'll mention them to you. If you don't have any of the three, you won't be interested. Suffering, frustration, death. If all three were eliminated, there most likely would be no religion. And in fact, in the face of these three provocations, for most of human history, people have felt an extraordinary helplessness. I mean, the life cycle goes its own merry way, right? We are strong, and then we're vulnerable, and then we're weak, and then we die, and wouldn't it be nice if we could stop the whole process? Right? Wouldn't it be wonderful if there was some extraordinary power in the world that could reverse the process, could cure suffering, alleviate frustration, eliminate death? Well, for most of human history, as far as we can see, people have believed that such a power exists. And it's an extraordinary power. At first, they saw the power in the things of nature. They saw the power as existing in stones and in trees and in beautiful, brilliant objects that became part of their life. And then the power shifted. The power was viewed as existing in the spirits of the dead. The very fact that they survived death meant they had extraordinary power. We call them our ancestral spirits. Right? And they possessed the extraordinary power, and the world now became filled with spirits. And then, as religion evolved, the ancestral spirits turned into gods. The gods had personalities like human beings. They could be approached like human beings. They were like gigantic father and mother figures who dominated the landscape of the world, but they had extraordinary power to alleviate suffering, frustration, and death. They also had the power to use that power against us if we displeased them. And finally, and that's the evolution of religion, religion mirrors the political development of humanity. As you go from family to clan, from clan to tribe, from tribe to nation, from nation to empire, the gods get organized. First, they get organized into something called the pantheon, where every god gets an assignment. The god of thunder, the god of fertility, the god of war, everybody gets an assignment, and there's generally a chief. And then you ultimately arrive at the point where you only have the chief. And the chief is God. All the extraordinary power ultimately what? Emanates from him. And in fact, most of the successful great religions of the last 2,000 years feature that system. Now, the unique behavior of religion historically has not been ethics, although the act has been ethical, because getting the power can help people. Losing the power can harm people, right? The unique behavior of religion historically has always been worship. And worship means the bringing of gifts to the gods or to God. And in exchange for the gifts, we receive the gift of the extraordinary power. Now, let me just go through the various gifts that people have brought to the gods or to God. Food. After all, most people were engaged in agriculture. What did they have? They didn't have cash. They had food, so they brought grain, vegetables, whatever. They also brought animals who were slaughtered. We read about that certainly in the Bible. One thing that everybody could bring was what we bring as a gift to the people we know. It's called praise. Sometimes praise is flattery. Flattery can be both sincere and what? Insincere. But essentially, you bring words. And you say praise, wonderful, marvelous praise. And so you have what we call the worship service. They are gifts, right? The third kind of gift is time. You take a slice of your time and you give it to the gods or to God. That's called a holy day. You just what? You slice out a slice. Everybody can give a slice of time, right? Certainly the idea that appears in the Bible of the Sabbath, do you understand? The Shabbat is exactly that, right? You slice out a period of time and say, this day belongs to. I give it to you. Everybody can do it. Rich, poor, doesn't make any difference. Certainly one of the gifts you can bring, and in all cultures it is there, is music and dance, right? You can dance out the story of the gods, whatever. You can put it into music, and you give it as a gift. One of the gifts that you can give is your own suffering. Meaning, if indeed the God is displeased with me, and that's why I am suffering, my gift is that I say that I know it by what? Causing suffering to myself. So, I may fast for a day. I may abstain from sex for the rest of my life. I may wear a hair shirt, or as what often happens in places that I have been, in religious rituals, people jump up and down, they'll take knives and they'll what? They'll cut their flesh. But the supreme gift that you can give to the gods historically, it happened in Indonesia, are people. I mean, we know from the Bible that in the ancient Semitic world, parents took their firstborn sons and they offered them up as sacrifices. We know from the Aztec world that they took captives and they offered them up, slicing out their hearts, they offered them up as sacrifices on the altars. One of the reasons why people went to war was so they could capture people whom they could offer as sacrifices to the gods. In some way, the young people blown up in Indonesia are what? Are exactly that. Or you may offer up your own self as a martyr, right? That is the supreme sacrifice. And now, in the age of the suicide bomber, we have a lot of people who have chosen to do that. I mean, right? To do that. All in the name of religion and ethics. It is the religious thing to do. It is also the what? In the system, the moral and ethical thing to do. Now, there are two major varieties of religion around, and the first we call ancestral. Ancestral religion is where most people are. That is, the religion you have, the system you follow, is not a function of your choice. You are simply born into it. And most people end up staying where they are born. No, you're born into it. After all, in order to leave it, you would have to confront the disapproval of your mother, your father, your grandmother, your grandpa. Nobody wants to deal with it. Most people don't want to. They don't want to deal with it. So you're there. And in fact, when most people talk about their religious attachments, they're always talking about their mothers, their fathers, their grandmothers, those are the memories they have. It's very powerful. The second kind, which emerged about 2,500 years ago, transcended family and ancestors. I call it salvation religion. These were religions that appealed to individuals making a choice. That is, you were invited to leave your ancestral religion and to join this new religion which promised you something so overwhelming in terms of its rewards that you would be foolish not to do so. The great reward always, the salvation, was the conquest of death, not only the conquest of death, but the arrival after death in an absolutely wonderful and extraordinary place. When Osama bin Laden talks to his boys, right, and invites them to be suicide bombers, he talks about the what? The place. So these are called salvation religions. The clergy, to a large degree that you'll find in ancestral religion, are priests. They tend the shrines of the ancestors. But the figures that dominate the salvation religions, at least at the beginning, are prophets, people who bring powerful messages about. And this is very important. The way. There is the way. Do you want to? There is the path. If you follow that path, you will get to the extraordinary power. If you deviate from the path, to the left, to the right, to the right, to the left, whatever, you will not get there at all. And there aren't three routes. This path, that path, this path, that path. Take your choice. There's what? One path for everybody. And often you'll hear in religious phraseology from salvation religions, they use the phrase, the path, the way. In Judaism, the word was halakha, the path, the way, the walking, that is the way. We even have that coming out of Taoism, right? The way. Oh, well. So salvation religions now presented the path. It was more than simply imitating or following the strictures and requirements of your ancestors. You were now into the way. Now, in modern times, there's a third variety. It's called mixed. Christianity historically was a salvation religion, but most people today are Christians because they what? They were born into it. So it's, I call it, you understand? It's called mixed. Rabbinic Judaism started out as a salvation religion, but most people are there because what? They were born into it. Now in Africa and Asia, where there are missionaries, do you understand? Then salvation religion is a what? A personal, individual choice. And still is today, because there are all these people who suddenly leave it and then suddenly are born, right? Born again. We have all the celebration and ceremony of choice. Now, both ancestral and salvation religions are reinforced by certain things. Certainly by family, because ancestral religion would have no power without family. If you didn't care about your parents and your ancestors, then what? Who cares? It's reinforced by clergy. After a while, you need specialists, in particular to take care of and administer the worship. And the clergy now become the preachers and teachers of the faith. They're very important. I mean, you can't talk about Muslim fundamentalism without talking about the imams who preach in the mosques. One of the reinforcements is patriotism. My loyalty to my state, my loyalty to my nation means that I'm also loyal to the religion. And associated with the state is power. One of the reinforcements of religion is that historically, many of these salvation religions were embraced by the government that used its power to enforce the religion. The idea of the separation of religion and government is a what? It's a very new idea. It's something that arose in Western Europe and in North America, is embodied in the Constitution of the United States of America, but certainly is not historic nor traditional. Neither in the Bible nor in the Quran is there any separation of religion and government. And it's reinforced by the acquisition of religion of something else. In almost all salvation religions and in most ancestral religions, the clergy and the religious authorities become the experts on morality. And that's often expressed by the fact that they teach it. They teach people what is right and wrong. They also may be the people who are in charge of the welfare system, and in fact, often the church and the mosque were the institutions that offered relief to the poor. And they're usually, until modern times, the people who were in charge of all education. So religion and morality came together. And the big question always is, what morality does a religion teach? Is it true that all morality taught by all the religions in the world would be regarded by us in this room as moral? Or would we be selective? Huh? Would we say, well, I think this is more. No, I don't think blowing up young people in nightclubs in Indonesia is, well, you may think it is, but what? I don't think it is. And you may have your quotations, but what? I have my quotations. Now, religious morality as it emerged through mainly salvation religion, the successful religions of the West, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, was authoritarian. What that meant was that the rules and regulations came from the top down, not from the what? The bottom up. It was traditional in the sense that no preacher of the religion said, it seems to me that this is what is right. What generally is said is, Moses said, and Moses told Joshua, and Joshua told him, and so told, and finally I got the information. Or Jesus said, and it comes down, do you understand? It comes down to me, or it's recorded in the Bible, or whatever it is, meaning it's not a new idea, it's not just my personal observation, it what? It has its origin and source in the deep past. Religious morality generally featured a system of reward and punishment. If you go through the path, you are enormously rewarded. If you fail the path, you are enormously punished. Religious morality generally said that since morality came from God, and God was infallible, rules and regulations were eternal. Right? Forever and ever and ever and ever. And, of course, they were revealed, meaning they did not arise, the rules and regulations of our group do not arise from the experience of the people in the group. The rules and regulations come directly from God and therefore were revealed at some specific time in human history, and each of the great religions has the story of revelation. Now, from the beginning, the preachers of religion who became the preachers of morality had to confront certain issues, which they answered in certain ways. How do you deal with parents? Oh. Well, I do want to tell you, given historic religious morality, most children today most likely would flunk. Of course, they just flunk. Because the answer that it came down to, whether it's traditional Christianity, traditional Islam, traditional Judaism, is that you revere your parents and you obey them in all things. I mean, there are a few exceptions. If they tell you to leave the religion, you don't listen to them. But I mean, there it is. It's the reverence and obedience of parents. Oh. No, I do want to tell you that in many parts of the third world, the Muslim world, all right, in the Hindu world and whatever, that value is still, right, that's what is moral. Children who challenge their parents, who defy them and disobey them, are immoral. Then there is the issue, certainly, of property. The general point of view was that property was unevenly distributed through society. There were kings, there were nobles, there were peasants, whatever, and in fact, as long as the poor were not neglected, the unequal distribution of wealth was perfectly what? Okay. They had to address the whole issue of women. Oh. Well, in almost all traditional salvation religions, women don't come off too well. In almost all of them, their primary role is to serve their husbands and to bear children. All right? And in fact, that is their, not only their religious role, it's their moral. Right? That is their moral role. And if women defy that rule and regulation, certainly now in the Muslim world, right? They are not only opposing Allah, they are immoral. The issue of sex, generally speaking, in almost all cultures, sexual activity was viewed, and maybe justifiably, with great apprehension. You can find a few quotations somewhere or other that you should enjoy it. But they are far and few between. Do you understand? I mean, people are always looking for a quotation, you know. I've got rabbis running around saying, oh, Judaism believes in the pleasures of sex. So they got two quotations they finally dug out of 86 volumes. I said, if indeed it believed it that way, then why was my grandmother dressed from here to here with a wig? I mean, why? On the whole, sexual pleasure was viewed as a diversion from the maintenance of the traditional family. It's not love, but what? Loyalty and obedience that maintains the family. Then there was the issue of strangers. Oh. what we find in most religious morality is that for the members of your own group, you are supposed to extend incredible love. So I assume that the gang that planted the bomb are really nice to each other. No, do you understand? They love each other. They're buddies. They're nice to each other. They're loyal. They're all bound together and whatever else it is. But the outsider, the stranger, blow them up. I used to find it so interesting. I would have bigots living on my block. They were so nice to their children and their parents and their friends, but they hated blacks, and they had all these hates. And these people, you could just what? You could burn crosses on their lawns, and you could blow them up. So it's this dichotomy. Are they rotten people? I mean, you know, they were very nice within their own circle. I alluded to this last week when I talked about one of the issues of morality, ethics and politics. What is my group? Is it my family? Am I just nice to my family? I go shoot everybody else? Is it my neighborhood? Is it my nation? Is it humanity? Like, what's my group? One of the issues, obviously, was the issue of authority. And generally speaking, in almost all religions, the ultimate and final authority was placed in the deputies of God, namely the clergy. And one of the great issues, of course, was the path. If we look at Rabbinic Judaism, or we look at Christianity, or we look at Islam, we have a very clear answer about the path. There is one and only one path, and our path is the what? The true path. It's called exclusivism. Perhaps it is one of the most dangerous ideas that has entered into human culture. We are afraid to touch it, but I'm going to touch it here. Because we're all into being nice to everybody else, so when you have an interfaith banquet, somebody gets up and says something very exclusive, which really is insulting to other people. And you say, "Thank you, Reverend, for sharing with us." Because everybody's supposed to be what? Nice to everybody else. I mean, if you did that in politics, it would really be regarded as rude. If you got up and said, "Well, I think that we should only have Republicans. Democrats are evil," or vice versa. I mean, can you imagine that kind of a system? So we have, and built into the salvation religions is an ethical problem, and that's the ethical problem I want you to hang on to. It's the ethical problem that leads to the bombing in Bali. It is somebody claiming that not only do I have a path that works, it's claiming I've got the what? The one and only. The true. You better get on my path. If you're on somebody else's path, what? You ain't going to make it. You're not going to get there. So it's exclusivism, and this exclusivism is manifest certainly in various forms of behavior. One is the creation of a status. It's a word that we use in English, but it can be translated into French, German, Latin, Arabic. It doesn't make any difference. Infidel. Infidel. Infidel is the what? The non-believer. The person who is outside my group. What can I do to the infidel? Well, what has happened in these cultures, I mean, you can always find the quotations about love and you can say, well, that isn't really what the religion is about. So now we come to a very important thing that I deal with in life. Are people their quotations or their behavior? If the people I bumped into I dealt with on the basis of their quotations, I would go stark raving mad. I would not be in touch with reality. People and groups and institutions are their behavior. That's who we are. So you can't tell me, well, the Crusades wasn't really Christian. But they did it. And then you're going to pull some quotation out of the Bible and say, well, that really isn't Christianity. But they did it. And you can say, holy war is, well, that's not really Muslim. And you can find a quotation. They love quotations. So you pull out a quotation from the Quran and say, ooh, that's the quotation. But what does that have to do with the behavior of the organization? So what we encounter is that over the centuries, infidels tend to be demonized. And once you demonize the infidel, then you have the right to kill him. It's a moral act. And therefore, the history of organized religion over the last 2,500 years in terms of salvation religions has been war. Terrible war. There has been external war. The war between the Christians and the Muslims began in the 7th century and has not stopped. Millions and millions of people have been killed because there is this concept of the infidel. There were the Crusades, and the Crusaders felt morally justified in what? Invading other lands, conquering and destroying. And in fact, Muslim armies marched into Christian lands and they felt perfectly comfortable what? Killing and destroying. I mean, and the justification for the entry was religious. We have the one true path. We have to get the information to these people what? Right away. Well, but there's more than external war. By the way, external war also featured something that is endemic in this present crisis. There was a small religious group called the Jews. And in fact, the response to the Jews in the Middle Ages was one of what we call anti-Semitism. It was a declaration of war. In many cases they were expelled, and in many cases they were massacred, and all of it was done in the name of morality. But then there are the internal wars, you see. So now we're both Christians. And we all agree there is one true path. But I'm a Catholic and you're a what? And you're a Protestant. So now we disagree on the what? The one true path. So I now call you, not an infidel, I call you an apostate. Ooh. And now you're on the wrong path, and now I have the right to what? To kill you. Do you understand the history of Europe in the last 2,000 years? In the 17th century alone, the Catholics and Protestants in Germany went to war. And close to 1/3 of all the people in Germany were killed. And the action that was taken was supported by the respective clergies. And in fact, they viewed themselves as the defenders of morality. People came to them because they were the what? The paragons of morality. But they were defending the what? The one true path. The most dangerous thing that can happen to humanity is that the wrong information gets out. And anybody who spreads wrong information is what? Immoral and must be shut up or eliminated. It may be hard for us to understand that world because we now live in a what? In a different world. But I do want to tell you that there are millions and millions and millions of people in the world who are still in the old system. Now, all of this was aggravated through the years by the fact that the clergy itself did not live up to its own standards. I mean, one of the reasons for the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century was that there was enormous corruption among the clergy. A corruption that resembles what is going on now or in the sexual scandals of the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, after all, are they not supposed to be the paragons of virtue? The role models of morality? There was the aggravation of the wealth of the clergy. If indeed we're heading toward the next life, why do I need such enormous buildings, such grand palaces, whatever else? I mean, there was the problem, and it occurs all over. You can go to Buddhism and you can find Buddhist monks who have no desire whatsoever for things in this life. So they say. Accumulating gold and silver, do you understand, and creating this incredible establishment of buildings of worship. I mean, that's always been a provocation. One of the aggravations is that historically most clergies, for reasons of safety and security and whatever, ally themselves with the establishment. Which means that the people who aren't part of the establishment, in most cases the poor, the people underneath, the rulers at the top, find that the organization does not work for their benefit, but works for the benefit of the few at the top. Now I want to come to another issue. It's fading in our culture because we're a mobile society and most people don't even know where their grandparents or great-grandparents are buried. But let me talk about Egypt. Egypt has always intrigued me. Egypt was a country dominated by religion and dominated by its clergy. And in fact, it devoted maybe 40% of its national wealth to building tombs in which the most beautiful objects, do you understand, that were around were placed in the tomb sealed. These objects were not available for human use. Now, in some respects, I'm glad they did it, because had they not done it, well, tourists wouldn't be able to know, and archaeologists wouldn't be able to find all these things. But if I were living in the culture at that time, do you understand? 40% of the wealth given to the dead. Is that moral? Is that ethical? Well, the Egyptian system of what? Of course it was. Of course it was moral. Of course. And one of the recurring problems is that historic religion, since it's so ancestrally minded, resists all forms of innovation. In fact, to make changes in religion often takes 100 times as much energy as to make a change in the corporate world. In the corporate world, you sit around and you say, what? Well, we're not making profits, so we have to change our thing, change our strategy. We'll change the strategy, the whole thing. Or people in their private lives. I don't like the wallpaper. I don't like the paint. I'll change it. But if you want to change 2 words in a ritual, do you understand? 2 words. You've got to hold international meetings, and they go on for centuries, and they finally agree they can change 1 word. Now, the reality of today, the reason why we can critique it in this way, is that a revolution took place. We're part of the revolution. The revolution took place in Western Europe and is now spread all over the world. The revolution had as its foundation the arrival of prosperity into Western Europe in the 15th and 16th century, and therefore a new focus on the part of people on life in this world. The arrival of a new way of looking at truth which followed it, which we call science. The arrival of the market economy, which features something that traditional religion did not provide. Traditional religion is built on the notion of one path. Got it? One path? The market economy, on the other hand, is built what? You don't like Neiman Marcus? Go to Saks. You don't like Saks? Go to Brooks. What you do in life is I have what? I'm empowered to what? I'm empowered to choose. I choose. Oh. And now we have been totally converted to what we call the what? The market economy. We are always choosing. One of the challenges came from the fact that the world of science ultimately produced rivals to the clergy. They were in institutions that were different from the churches or the synagogues. They're called universities. And they had ideas, right? And they became professors, and now they were what? Offering ideas that were challenges, even ethical critiques. One of the great challenges, of course, was the arrival of literacy. Once you learned to read the Bible, you could read what? Anything, and now you could read challenging ideas. Well, the consequence of that is that a new ethical system arrived in the world. I think that most of the people in this room have been converted to it. And we have to understand it because it's that ethical system that allows us to critique. Do you understand? What went before. Otherwise, we would simply be what? We'd be part of that old system. Now, that revolution has not taken place in most of the Muslim world. So, let me give you the new values. They're not traditional. Personal freedom. Right? I talked about it last week, but it's a very important value. I have the right to choose where I live, to choose the person I will marry, to choose my friends, to choose my work, to choose my religion, to choose whether I will be religious or not. Got this whole thing? That's new. And in fact, we in America now regard that as a right, don't we? When you say the word right, you've invested it with ethical value, haven't you? You've invested it with ethical value. We think this personal freedom has what? Has value. The new values feature something called democracy, which means that we are accustomed now to choose our rulers on the basis of their performance, not simply to receive what? Commands, directives. The third is feminism. I mean, the life of women in the Western world has radically changed and radically altered. The idea that women have the right to participate in the political process, the belief that women have the right to receive equal compensation from, all of it. Do you understand? It's like a whole new thing. And the right of women to choose even not to be part of a traditional family. Oh, they've got the whole new system. 4 is the idea of, certainly, of equality, which means that we believe that fundamentally political power should be distributed fairly equally. It can never be entirely equal, but certainly more equal. One of the most important values is when things don't work, we believe that we have the right to change them. Not simply endure them. And now comes the great word in the Declaration of Independence, our right to happiness here on earth. So, blowing people up saying, well, maybe they'll get their what? Their due later on is not a moral behavior. And in fact, one of the values that we now have. That's why we have interfaith banquets. That's why people now have friends of many religions and so forth. It's called toleration, isn't it? Is that a value? Which is, yes, I have my path. And I think my path works. But quite frankly, it may be the case that your path also works. You know, I mean, I don't have this absolute, total, complete certainty. I just don't know. Maybe yours works too. So, you know, hello. Why would I blow you up? We're all in this world struggling to find the truth and what, you know, so we're sort of easy on each other. Toleration, which hopefully through encounter turns into respect, is like a what? A fundamental value. You don't have infidels living next door to you. You may have people, what, of a different faith or religion, but you don't have if you have infidels, you got to what? Avoid them. And one of the things, of course, which is part of the new value system is a kind of optimism, which is certainly characteristic of American culture, which is that although we have many, many difficulties, we don't have to fail. We can succeed through our own human ingenuity, human energy, and maybe with some divine help to what? To get to where we want to go. Now, I put it to you that this value system, which now pervades a large part of American and West and European life, it's a new value system. And so now this value system enables us to critique what religion has done. Now, the consequence of the arrival of the new value system is the emergence in the world today of what I call essentially, for those who are religious, two religions.
Only you can prevent